In this video, I'm going to show you how I get rid of European buckthorn, or the smooth buckthorn, which is also invasive around here. So I live in Ontario, and both of those buckthorns are non-native, but they're spreading like crazy around here. When I moved into this 6-acre property, I thought I had all these native shrubs. And I had a closer look and found out most of them were European buckthorn. And I had huge trees already. They were seeding every place. What a mess. So I spent the last 10 years trying to get rid of these. Now the first thing I thought I'd do is, well, I'll just get some Roundup and I'll just spray these bushes. Spraying Roundup on the leaves of European buckthorn will not kill them. There's one right here. And what will happen with these leaves is they get crippled. They get smaller and wrinkled, but the plant does not die. Each year the leaves are a little bit more normal, and after 2 or 3 years the plant's back to growing. That didn't work. Besides, the problem with that is you kill all the other native things around it. So it's not really a good option when you're working in the woods here. The best way to get rid of them is to cut them and paint the stems. I'm going to show you how to do that. This is the mixture I use for painting my European buckthorn. It's Roundup and it's concentrated. Don't buy the stuff that's in the spray bottles. That's far too diluted. Get yourself a good concentrate. Now, concentrated Roundup comes in different formulations. I have a farm grade Roundup that is about 540, and I dilute that in half, so I end up with somewhere around 250. I'm not too fussy about the dilution. 250 to 300 works really well. Check your container and see what your concentration is, and then dilute it so you're somewhere in that ballpark. I use a kitty pail. I know it sounds funny, but this thing from the dollar store works great, and I've been using it for 10 years. I also have a really cheap paintbrush from the dollar store. And you can get any size. This is a 1.5 inch, and it just seems about perfect. I take my Roundup, put a little bit in the pail, add a little water to dilute it. But I want to end up with a final mixture of somewhere in the order of 30 to 50 mils. That's enough for me to go out and kill a couple hundred buckthorns. You need very little of this chemical. Once you've made up your mixture, use it right away. So each time I do this, I'll make it up, go to the woods, use it all up, and then I'm done. And usually by then I'm tired anyways. And then tomorrow I come back and do some more. When I'm finished, I just put some water in here, shake it around a little bit, dump it on some ground where there's nothing growing, and you're done. Remember, Roundup is extremely safe. It's actually less toxic than vinegar. And if you don't believe me about that, have a look at my other video, and I'll put a link to that about the truth about Roundup. Now let's go in the woods and kill some buckthorn. So this is how I get rid of my buckthorn. For very small ones, if they're under a foot, you can pull them out of the ground. Once they're over a foot long, they're really hard to pull out. So then I use pruners and a brush. I've got my Roundup mixture ready to go. I find the plants I want to get rid of. I make the brush wet. I tap it on the side. I don't want this dripping wet. I don't want drops going over all my native plants, and I don't need that much liquid. So give it a good tap. Just make the bristles wet. Put the pail somewhere where you won't knock it over. And then come along. It's a two-handed job. Cut, dab. Cut, dab. Here's a bigger one. Dab. That's all there is to it. With one brush like this, I can do about a dozen, 15 plants, depending on how big the cutoff area is. Then I go back to the pail, recharge the brush, tap it off, and I'm good to do another dozen plants. And I find this really efficient, particularly with pruners, because I can use both hands. If I'm going after larger ones, I use my loppers, and I'll cut them off and then dab it on. Same with a chainsaw. I've done trunks that are this big. Cut it off with a chainsaw, come along, and just put this around the edge. You don't actually have to paint the whole trunk. You only want the inch around the outside. That's where the chemical will be pulled into the roots. Now here's some other tips to make this work really well. I like to do this in fall. So I'm in zone 5, so starting in September, that's when I like to treat these. Part of the reason is at that time of the year, the plant is starting to move its nutrients down into the roots. And so it's sucking things down. And when I paint this, I want it to continue sucking my Roundup down. I can do European buckthorn quite light. So right now it's the middle of October. Most of my native trees are starting to lose the leaves, but European buckthorn are still green, and they'll still be green for another month or so. So in early November, I can come through here and just look for all the green bushes. I know they're European buckthorn. All the native leaves are already on the ground, and I can spot them very easily. You want to do this on a day when it's not going to rain. The idea is to get these stumps painted and then have a dry period for several hours. And as a rule of thumb, I like to go for 24 hours, but I think 3 or 4 hours is probably all that's required. But you can't do this in the rain, it just washes the Roundup off. Now, one of the reasons I really like this technique is that it's really targeted and uses so little chemical. The only thing that will be killed here is the piece that I touch with my brush. All the other native plants and grasses around here are just fine. Here's a native tree. It won't be affected by the Roundup I put on here. It's very targeted, and I only need a few drops to kill these. The other thing I've learned over the years is it's 100% successful. The only buckthorns that make it through this process are the ones that I cut and then I forget about and I don't paint it. And that's one of the reasons I don't do too many at once. Even with the chainsaw, I'll come along and do maybe half a dozen in an area, then paint them. If I do one over here and one over there and 20 over there, I'll forget where they are and they won't get painted. And then they'll just regrow. In fact, they regrow worse than they were before. So do a few, paint them, make sure you get them all, then do a few more. I get rid of 300 to 400 European buckthorns every year, and I've been doing it for about 10 years, so I know this method works. Let's say you're starting new. You've got a wooded area and you've got lots of European buckthorn. Here's the way to approach things. Go after the big bushes first, and you want to get the females. In European buckthorn, there's male plants and there's female plants. How do you tell the difference? Well, the female plants will have berries in the fall. So when I'm going into a new area and I know I don't have time to do them all, what I do is I go through and take down anything that's fruiting. Anything with berries gets cut that first year. I want to stop making future plants. The problem is the berries last in the ground somewhere around 7 years. And I think it's even longer than that in my climate. So even if I get rid of all the females this year, I'm going to have seedlings coming up for the next 7 to 10 years. In some areas of this, I've cleaned out all the buckthorn, and then 3 years later I come back and they're all back again. But this time there's no berries because I'm getting them younger and younger every year. So get those females out first, then go after the big ones, and then go after the smaller ones. Eventually you will win. And it's important that we all tackle these invasive plants, because the berries that are made on your property are being carried by birds to my property, and I really want you to clean up your property. See you in the next video.